Well, hello everyone, and wherever you are in the world right now, thank you very much for joining us. We've now got over 330 participants on the webinar, so it's just fantastic that we've got so many of you able to join us today. So I'm Tim Eldridge, Vice President of IOSH, and delighted to welcome you to this, which is the latest in our series of our COVID-19 webinars. So as I'm sure many of you will know, IOSH, which is the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, is the chartered body and the world's largest membership organisation for health and safety professionals. And we have over 47,000 members in 130 countries working in nearly every industry sector. And our vision is a safer, healthier world of work for everyone, which is no more true than ever it is at the moment. So today, this is our first session of 2021. And yes, we are continuing our COVID-19 webinar series into 2021. We weren't sure whether that would be the case some months ago, but of course we know it is. And we'll be focusing today on keeping in touch with our creativity during the pandemic and how this relates to our work and health. Now, as we all know, the ongoing pandemic continues to have a major impact on all of our workplaces across all industries worldwide. And certainly in some countries and some locations with the arrival of the new variant of the virus, it's having at the moment even greater effect on our livelihoods, our health, well-being provisions. And of course, innovations are being rapidly applied as much as ever to enable the world to continue functioning and hopefully, or almost certainly, I think, to recover in the next few weeks and months. No one will be more acutely aware of the importance of nurturing innovation and new ways of working than all of us in these difficult times, and particularly in the art and creative industries. So that's why I'm delighted that joining us for this discussion, we've got three panelists today, all whom work within the arts, media and creative industries, and are championing creative ways of keeping going in spite and of course because of COVID-19. So I'd like to introduce our panel to you now. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Sam Oldham. Sam is the Commercial and Operations Director at the Roundhouse in Camden, London, here in the UK. Sam's worked in various venues, leisure and sporting environments for over 20 years and has been involved in a diverse range of activity throughout that time. And she's written and delivered health and safety and security presentations and exercises to different venues and emergency planning groups, and has worked with the IOSH advisory groups, with health and safety providers, local authorities, police and promoters in both the UK and the USA. She's also a certified IOSH managing safely trainer with Harrier, which is great. So welcome, Sam, and thanks for joining us today. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Filomena Rodriguez. Filomena is a creativity coach with 18 years experience of working with creative people in both the creative and cultural sectors. Her educational and academic background is in creative expressive therapies and how this connects the close relationship between creativity and well-being. She's passionate about helping people thrive, gain clarity, purpose, and confidence, aligning their values with creative practice and weave these into a business. And as a creative and visual artist herself, she understands some of the challenges that creatives face, in particular, the often unique way that creative people experience and express their view of the world. So welcome and thanks for joining us, Filomena. And finally, I'd like to introduce Zoe Davis. After starting her safety career in the crane and construction industry, Zoe spent nearly 10 years at IMG Endeavour, where she was in-house health and safety for the fast-paced sports, events and media company, taking her to some exciting parts of the world. And Zoe has just recently joined the BBC as their new head of safety and will be continuing her exploration of changing cultures within safety. So again, thank you, Zoe, for joining and welcome to our panel today. So we've got some prepared questions that I'm going to ask our panelists to talk about, but of course we've got the interactive Q&A as well through the Zoom. So although we're happy to go through a number of key questions we've got, if you have got questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and I will try and cover as many of those as I can. Obviously, the more we get, the less I'll be able to cover them all, but we'll do our best. So let's make a start. So first and foremost, perhaps I will start with you, Sam. And first question is around the benefits, and what are the benefits of adopting a creative mindset at work, and how does creativity help us at challenging times like these?
Well, as you said, Tim, in your introduction, we're all involved in the creative industries. So actually, we probably do it very naturally. And at the Roundhouse specifically, it's central to everything we do. It's the heart of everything we do. We work with young people, and we're a charity that supports the work of young people and encourages them and adopts their ethos towards creativity. And we give them an outlet to do that with our studios. We also have our Grade 2 listed building, which has an incredible main space in there, which hosts music gigs and has done for many years, and also private events. So we're very fortunate in the fact that perhaps creativity flows through all different aspects of our work. And I think in many respects, that's enabled us to continue being creative, even while we've not been open. We've had a few opportunities to open our doors to non-audience members when we were in the tier that allowed that. And we did do live streaming. So Leanne LaHavas did a live streaming show from the Roundhouse main space. And I think it really gave our staff an opportunity to keep being creative, because of course there was an incredible amount of planning for that. And as everybody who works in the creative industries know, that when you have any kind of live event, or I'm sure Zoe's going to talk about recorded events or filming or recording, what you see actually on screen or in person is the result of many, many hours of planning from a health and safety perspective, from an audience journey and enjoyment perspective. And of course, with COVID, we then had to be really creative about how we manage this. We may not have had a live audience, but we still had human beings in the area. We still had to consider our cleaning regime, how we were going to get people in and out safely, whether it was production or crew, internal staff, how they were going to move around the venue, how they were going to be assigned toilets. And there was a tremendous amount of creative thinking that went into that we've not had to do before. And we did it. We did it really well. We had a lot of learnings, of course, but it was because of the fact that we're already in the creative industries. It really, really enabled us to continue with that creative thinking, and it is important. And I think, current organizations and future organizations, I personally feel, after speaking to a lot of my colleagues and friends, that when COVID passes, that actually a lot of the things that we've learned from a creative standpoint will still remain in place, and I think enable us to build and grow on that. So yeah, incredibly important, and I think the learnings are important as well.
Thanks, Sam, and yeah, some really interesting points already coming out. And Philomena, I see you nodding vigorously there from your experience, and I'm sure you're fascinated to see how people are adapting and creating at this time.
Absolutely. I've had the privilege of working on a one-to-one basis with creative people and creative businesses, and I've been doing that for a number of years. And it's been really interesting to see how creativity has flourished. It's not to say that the challenges are not real, they absolutely are. And we're kind of in this kind of weird shared experience, and we're all kind of facing our own demons and challenges with that. But it's just really interesting to see how adopting a creative mindset actually kind of supports that element of the unknown that we're all experiencing, even with some degree of certainty with elements of things that are happening at the moment. For example, vaccines that are coming into operation and are being delivered. And but I think from the point of view of being able to pivot and change, with creativity, I think comes a degree of adaptability. So in terms of adopting a mindset, I think it's reliant to some degree on nurturing an environment that allows that to happen. And I think in the case of COVID, I think we've kind of been pushed into a situation where we just have to kind of get on with it. And I think in some instances, there's lots of space to think about how we can do things differently. But I think certainly over the last 12 months, what we've seen is some very, very rapid adaptations to ways of working. And businesses and individuals that have adapted quickly have been able to adopt. And thankfully, we have the technology to reach out to people and connect and learn and, integrate our learning and reach out to kind of all kinds of audiences. So it's been a really interesting progression. And I guess it is challenging. And I think, I know from my experience of working with creatives, absolutely, they face that feeling of the unknown because they are creating something that essentially comes from their own learning, from their own research, an idea. I was very privileged to be able to mentor the artist Paul Cummings for a number of years and work with him briefly on the Tower of London project. And actually to kind of be able to, be in the presence of great creativity where there is risk and there is, thinking on your feet and, you're kind of making it up as you go along some of the time. So being able to hold that can be quite challenging. But I think, we're in a lot of respects, we're all kind of being encouraged to hold that space. And whilst I guess in the creative industries we're very familiar with that way of working, it's kind of bread and butter to us. What I'm fully aware is for people that maybe don't see themselves as being creative, it's challenging to know how to get creative. And I think the first step is, at the very, very beginning of the crisis, we were all in a state of panic and unknown. And I think when we're kind of in that state, it's very, very difficult to think creatively. We have to allow that and to run its course and then kind of pick up the pieces. There's a really interesting, it's something I've recently discovered, that the characters for Crisis in China, there are two Chinese characters. One character is danger and the second character is opportunity. So when we're going through that shift, absolutely we're in crisis, but actually what it opens up is an opportunity to do things differently. And I think we've all, to some extent, big or small, where we're organizations or individuals, being forced to look at how we can do things differently.
Brilliant, thanks. And coming over to you, Zoe, and again, I'm sure you got some really very interesting, both from your experience, but also sort of venturing into a slightly new world that you've been doing over the last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined BBC a few weeks ago. So as a few of my colleagues are saying, it's hitting the ground running at the moment. So the organisation has been, it's renowned for being creative. So creative in the sense of coming up with fabulous storylines, initiatives, content for documentaries. Even journalists need to be creative and when they're exploring a storyline. So I think what I've seen from the way the safety team have delivered it is to make sure that those people whose job it is to be creative, the people that come up with all those fabulous storylines, to make sure that if they are making something that is current, so for example, EastEnders is set in the present day, that they understand, they basically know what they need to know about COVID, what controls are in place, and they take that understanding, it's like a download of knowledge, into their creative thinking. So if you look at EastEnders at the moment, you will see that like CAF has got one-way systems and it's being brought into the storyline. So you do see a slight representation of what we experience in our day-to-day going into the storylines, such as EastEnders. Now, you've got creative in terms of coming up with fabulous stories, but then you've got creative in terms of what I would call being resourceful. So engineering something smart, redesigning the workflow. So you're looking at people like the directors, the people that work out who goes where, how it's going to look, and then the camera, lighting, everybody that helps the director create that image and put it all together. Now, there's been some really smart stuff going on there as well. So for example, the magic of TV, you can trick the camera angles. So intimate scenes such as kissing, where the actors can't come within 2 meters of each other, you can trick the angle. So if you film it, and this is where there is such a magic art and a science in TV making, but you can trick the angle to make it look like they are kissing. You can put screens up, you can even film people and replace them out. And then in post-production, we rely on the editors. They will magically, with all the skills that they have and creatively, knowing the tools that they have within those software programs, they're like, actually, I can panel 2 things across each other. They call it plating. So what we see at the final results isn't always exactly what's happening. So if you want to know more about that, actually, they did a YouTube video on it. So if you just look on YouTube for EastEnders COVID, there's a couple of, it was on Lorraine and a couple of other programs where you can see particularly what the EastEnders team have done to, I suppose, resourceful, and not just from creative story thinkers, but from the whole team all the way through. But from a safety perspective, I see it that, you know, our role is to make sure that everybody understands it and gets it, so that they can then take it away and put it into their thought process when they're creating their ways of working, and just redesigning and tweaking the workflow to make way for this new risk that they have to manage.
Fabulous, thanks Zoe, and thanks for some really interesting examples there. And just to sort of move the conversation on a bit further and come narrow a little bit. So do you see connections between that creativity you've just talked about and people's health, well-being, resilience, and their adaptability? Do you see that connection? And perhaps if go back with you, Zoe, to start with, what have you seen within sort of the BBC people? Is it supporting their health and well-being, or are you finding it's challenging it?
No, I think it's a totally joined up approach. Everybody needs to talk to everybody, and you've got people who are who are passionate about certain areas that, you know, want this to be the priority. But like we say with safety is an integrated way of how we do business. Awareness of mental health, mental well health and mental ill health is an integrated way of how we do business. Psychological safety is an integrated way of how we do it. So in terms of practicalities, there are considerations for managers in terms of how they how they permit their people, how they allow their teams to continue to be creative. So I don't know about you, but back in March, I thought, oh yeah, we'll be back in the office in June, back to normal. Don't worry about it. Leave your gym kit there. You'll get it in a few weeks. But here we are, you know, almost 9-10 months down the line. So I think there is now a shift into, okay, so how do I make sure that my teams can continue to be creative in all its guises and definitions, whilst we're, you know, looking at these kind of restraints. So I think it's important to understand how your team work, and even yourself. So I've had to take a look and go, how was I creative back then? At the moment it's firefighting, but I need to make space now for being creative, strategic, being able to process ideas and thoughts. So back then, back in the pre-COVID days, my drive to and from work, an hour or so, that was my space where I would just let things settle and think about things, work through an idea, practice a conversation I was going to have, think about outcomes of different decisions I was going to make that day. And similarly then on the way home, that would be my way of, and this is very old-fashioned Windows, but how I would just defragment my drives in my mind, just let it all process, you know, and stuff that I would need to finish off when I get home. So just having that space. Now I don't have that. I essentially walk 10 steps from bedroom to office. So I need to design that back in for me to go, actually, that was the time where I had what I would call guilt-free brain space. Now, there is that thing of presenteeism. Is my diary busy? Am I on every Zoom call? it's okay to go take a walk at lunchtime. And I think we've all had to get used to that thing of, it's okay to leave your mobile phone and your laptop and go take a walk, because sometimes for some people that walk is the creative element. For some people it's, I need a noisy Zoom with 20 people on it. For others, I need heavy music in the background. I think it's about, going back to your question, it's about your team and your people looking at what ways were they creative before, what environments, what situation worked well for them, and then being able to support it and empower it in this kind of new hybrid way of working.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to come to you, Philomena, because I'm sure in your coaching world, and you've had some fascinating conversations with individuals about how they're adapting to this current situation. So yeah, have you got anything you can share on that?
Absolutely. I think what I've kind of been witnessing, certainly over the last 12 months, and I think it's kind of a feature within the kind of creative mindset, is that well-being and creativity do go hand in hand. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Zoe. I think with creativity, to some extent, what's kind of in place is a sense of practice, i.e. something that you do that kind of enables you to test out. So this idea of thinking space is absolutely crucial as part of the creative journey. And what I've discovered over the years is where there is a blockage, it's because often, particularly if people are amplifying their creativity as a business, if they get too stuck in the business mode, then their creativity seems to kind of go awry. And when we work on really kind of paring it down, and I think that's something that we can all do right now. It doesn't have to be big stuff. I know that within organizations, and there's a lot of things that are kind of requiring this kind of creativity as a resource to kind of enable shifts and changes to happen. But I think on a personal level, we also need that. It's the engine that drives ideas and possibility forward. So I think in terms of creativity, I think there's a really strong connection between being creative and well-being and mindfulness. So going for a walk out at lunchtime, going for a walk in nature, not taking any digital devices with you, and actually being fully present is really important stuff. And some of the work that I've been doing over the last 12 months is actually working with some aspects of well-being as well, looking at sleep patterns, looking at diets, just kind of acknowledging what people are eating, how they're keeping themselves well. And I think with COVID, it's all about wellness. It is essentially all about how we are keeping ourselves well. And we know that stress essentially has a big impact on the immune system. So if we can engage with creativity and well-being as essentially partners in this journey, it kind of opens up possibility. It kind of gives, by creating space that Zoe talked about, that thinking space, it gives us the opportunity to take a step back from what is all the kind of activity of what's going on around us. And I think if it's something that can be adopted as part of our own well-being practice, I think creativity follows suit. And I'm recognizing that for creatives, there is an increasing understanding that these two elements actually work very, very closely together. So, creativity doesn't have to be creating masterpieces or books, etc. And I know there's been a lot of kind of a big growth of creativity, but I think there's also been a lot of stress for those people that just haven't been able to find it out there. Creativity can be something very small. It's just about changing one thing that you would do on a day-to-day basis that kind of gives you the space to explore, just to kind of see the world slightly differently. So I totally agree. And I think there are lots of different ways that creativity shows up. It can be through artwork, it can be through photography, it can be through gardening, it can be through cooking, it can be through just writing a shopping list, it can be through just doing a brain dump and having a piece of paper and writing everything, journaling. There are so many ways in which that we can kind of facilitate it and give ourselves the space. And I think with creativity, what it gives us is that opportunity to reflect something of ourselves back to ourselves. And if we don't have that, we're just carrying everything. And that's where stress comes into play. So, creativity and well-being, and I think increasingly so, we're seeing that there's a really, really strong interplay.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And just coming to you, Sam, and I know probably want to build a bit on this. And also, I noticed they've got a question from Liam, which we're kind of talking about a bit, which is dealing with people who really have been struggling with that change and adapting. Is there anything sort of from your experience that we could support people with?
Yeah, I think, you know, and we've all learned as we've been through this, haven't we? So I think initially many organizations, and I put myself in that bracket, we were almost like, gosh, we see people almost every day and now we're not seeing them. Well, we'll put in a catch-up meeting every day to make sure people are okay. And I think both Zoe and Philomena both hit the nail on the head, that in some respects that was meaning that people didn't have their own individual space because they were constantly in these meetings, which was probably driven by each of our need to still remain connected with one another somehow. And I think that I quickly realized who were the people that were needing that day-to-day catch-up, check-in, and the people that were like, actually, I need a bit of space. I've got some projects I need to do. And for me, it had to become, of course, there's an organization-wide approach, of course there is. But for me, as a director who line manages and leads teams, I had to look at those individuals and actually what their needs were. And I think this has been, which we would do if we were seeing people daily. But that has almost been a step back and a rethink of how we make sure that some individuals who perhaps need that more close contact are getting that. And it isn't just people who perhaps live on their own or who haven't seen family for 9 months. It genuinely is people who've got families, some people who've got kids. They're homeschooling and now all they see are their kids. So actually they want that connection with other people. And just from my perspective, you know, we've all learned a lot. And in the beginning, you know, it was difficult to really gauge, but I would say that really treating everybody in the team as an individual, because we all have individual needs, wants and desires. And, you know, a Zoom meeting 5 times a week might be brilliant for somebody to see somebody and connect and check in. And for somebody else, it might really be like, I cannot believe I've got another meeting when I've got work to do. So you know, I'm not saying it would work for everybody. I have really taken an individual approach to each of my team. And I know that they have then taken individual approaches with their teams. And I think that has encouraged people to have that sense of well-being, to either get through. I've got some people who want a meeting first thing in the morning and some people who want it last thing at night, you know, last thing in the evening, in the afternoon. And I think that has been really, really important. And I think that's enabled people to then continue with what they need to do. But I think it's very much an individual approach. I honestly do.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. I'm just going to jump across to the Q&A because there's some great ones coming in. I already realise now we're not going to get to them all because we've got loads coming in. I think Christy's asked an interesting question, which is about the different demographics of people and their approach both to creativity and the way they deal with the pandemic. So from the sort of the younger workforce and through all the way through to the sort of elder workforce. But it's not just that aspect of diversity, of course, as well. It's others, and you know, we're not one specific very regimented group of people. So I might ask, perhaps starting with you, Philomena, what have you seen variations in how the different generations have responded, and has that impacted the creativity, or has it just been different ways of working?
I think it kind of boils down to the individual. I think perhaps with younger generation, perhaps there is more adaptability because of the connection with technology. But I think I agree with Sam. I think it very much depends on the individual, you know, whether you're introvert, extrovert, whether you kind of need to reach out to others to be creative, or whether it's something you actually need for yourself. And it's kind of part of a much more kind of internal process. It's very, very different. I think the net result perhaps is the same thing, but I think the way in which it shows up is different. So, you know, creativity kind of runs through us all. So I think how we deal with it, how we kind of approach it is different for everyone. So, and in order to nurture creativity, I think it's about environment and understanding the right kind of environment that's needed to ensure that, how do you create that space? Do you need noise? Do you need to have lots of people in on a conversation? Do you need groups? I think one of the things I have learned with working with the creative sector for a number of years is actually it's a combination of all those things. The kind of process of making something or coming up with a piece of artwork can be quite solitary, but actually you need to be part of a group, you need to be part of a discussion group, you need to be kind of showing work in some way to get feedback. So it's a mixture, but I think some individuals are far more comfortable with the solitary aspect, and I have creative friends who absolutely thriving from lockdown, because it means that they're really having to they're diverting their creative energy inward rather than outward. And there are others that are absolutely ripping their hair out because they need that interaction. So the introvert extrovert split is kind of interesting to see how people are adapting. I think also it's about the take up of technology and what that actually means to people. Absolutely it has positives, but also the downside of that is too much screen time. And I'm personally finding I can very, very easily slip into spending a lot more time on screens than I've been used to, and actually it brings a whole kind of different issue. But the flip side of that is technology is our kind of window to the world, and we're in a space where we have so much information, so much content out there that actually is kind of enabling creativity to happen, that is enabling learning to happen in very different ways. So it's how we produce and consume it, I think, is the thing that is a key factor in how creative we are. And I think that's a very, very personal thing.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some really interesting and different things there. And I'm just thinking, Sam, you've probably got a very diverse team that you work with, and have you noticed differences, and have you managed those differences as they've come across?
We haven't noticed that many specific differences, and that is because we're mostly not on site. So for people to actually feedback, in terms of I don't see why we can't go in, or I want to work from the offices, or I want to go in and do this. I have to be honest, I haven't seen too much resistance, but what I did right from the start was implemented some constant information. So when we brought in our screening process on arrival, that was immediately given to the whole organisation. So everybody knew if they did need to go in for any reason, that actually this was the screening process, this was the questionnaire, this was the arrival process. When we introduced our one-way systems, I took pictures and they went in a death by PowerPoint presentation, but it was given to the organisation. I had our security team, who were on site all the time, filmed themselves doing the weekly fire alarm check. And it's not going to win any Oscars, but we showed that to our teams, and they realised kind of on two things, that one, things were still happening, but also we were doing our best to get in a position where the minute we can open our doors to staff and the public, we will absolutely do that. So to be honest, there hasn't really been a difference in demographics that's come out in terms of people saying, they don't see why we have to socially distance. So everybody's been really, really understanding. And whether that is because of the information that's fed to them through the news or because of the lockdown situation. I mean, in London, we went from tier 2 to tier 4. I think it was in about 4 or 5 days. We went from tier 2, I think, am I right, Auntie Zoe? We went from tier 2 to tier 3, and then 4 days later, we were in tier 4. And I think the impact of things like that is what our teams have really realised. And that's not to say that we're not chomping at the bit to get open the minute we can. But I have to say that we haven't seen too much resistance. I think people are really understanding and following guidance and guidelines. So I can't really offer too much on that, other to say that again, going back to a point that Philomena spoke about as well, is that we're making sure that any individuals that perhaps have query or questions about it, we're speaking to on their own, and just delivering as information in staff meetings, etc., as we can.
Thanks, Sam. And And coming to you, Zoe, we'll continue the sort of theme of sort of the difference and diversity in teams and how that reflects at the moment, but also certainly the question from Maxine about retaining the momentum of the creativity, and I'm sure that interacts with how people respond differently. So do you have some good examples and from your experience of how people have responded differently but also can maintain that momentum?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I don't think it's exclusive to COVID. I think everybody works differently. So if we look at the gen sets, so I'm a millennial, I had a, pen and paper education, and then midway through university, we switched to digital. And then by the time I got into the workplace, smartphones and all this kind of stuff came out. So the Gen Zs, the ones younger than me who are now in the workplace, they are digital natives. Now, if you have a creative meeting with a Gen Z, quite a lot of the time they are going to be on 2 or 3 devices at once. They're able to concentrate and listen in on something. They'll be watching, a chat on something else, and they might have some of the information coming in the background. And it's that thing of, we may do it as well, where we're watching the rugby on the TV. I've also got the cricket on the iPad, and I'm watching Twitter for the latest on something else. So it's being able to recognize that people work in different ways. For some people, they haven't been comfortable with this switch over to this very digital way of working, and recognizing that, and people saying, like, actually, I don't really know how to use Zoom. And just being clear on your etiquette with Zoom. So a lot of meetings I've been in recently, your video is off until you need to speak. So that kind of takes down the exhaustion of watching everybody and being distracted and going, oh, I wonder what Sam's got on the wall there, and what's hanging off film, all that kind of stuff that goes on whilst we're listening and looking for those non-verbal communication, those non-verbal cues, and we're looking for them as well, just instinctively. That's going on in the back of our mind. So going back to the generational sets, I think it's important that you keep designing, keep tweaking to lean on whoever's leading that creative piece. So I have some members of my team that love Zoom, want to have a face-to-face, and others that enjoy Zoom, but they'll use it essentially to replace a phone call. So no videos. And when you have the video off, you can relax your eyes can go and chill out. That's the kind of like, in the car, the battery's running flat, you're like, turn off the radio, save everything. And you can just save your energy outputs of what you're doing. So just being clear with people, like if they need support with using Zoom, it's like when we brought in things like Trello and all these other like management tools that came in to help people when we were in an office. People do need support with it, so that you're comfortable, you're not kind of wasting your time working out how to use this platform. If you don't want to look at the boxes, don't, and just blending and keep shifting and then supporting people. But also, like, I find sometimes there's something that comes up and I'm like, well, I've never used this before, but generally I'll go on YouTube. There's some smart person there that can give me a video, a kind of a induction on how to use this software. And then just being honest with people, like, do you remember, like, back in the day in the office, some people would hate picking up the phone and having a phone call, just to have that fear, and not everybody does Zoom in the same way. So I think being open-minded to that and recognizing that you've got digital natives in the Gen Zs, but then you've got older generations who every single time there's a evolution in this tech, it's a learning curve for them that needs to be supported.
Yes, I can certainly reflect on that myself. I'm gonna move to another question, which I'm sure everyone is really interested in, and it's kind of what next, because this will come to an end. We know that, and we hope it's going to come to an end sooner rather than later. But that'll just be the pandemic coming to an end. What's not going to come to an end is the changes we've been through. So perhaps start with you, Sam. How do you think the most creative organisations can learn from and act on their COVID experiences to create a better post-pandemic world?
I think, gosh, there's so many different answers to this, so many different facets. I really do believe that. I think one of the things for me that's been really heartening is, and is a very fortunate thing in unfortunate circumstances, but is in the way that we have genuinely pulled together. And, I think we're probably all involved in organizations. So, at the Roundhouse, we might work with Society of London Theatres, we might work with the Music Venues Trust, and different people from different organisations. We work with young people, so youth organisations have all come together to share best practice, which I think has been so heartening, because we've all come across this and we've probably all done it. We've written a policy or a procedure or a plan that we really think is brilliant and we've implemented, but we've held it close to our chests. And I think so many people have been willing to share their best practice, whether it relates to an approach to creativity, whether it's about well-being, whether it's about just overall COVID safety of people, general safety. And I've personally found that really heartening. And I've actually really decided it's something that I want to continue when the pandemic is over, which is how can we remain connected with people outside of our organisation, and maybe even people outside of our field, who actually are really good at what they do. They are creative, they are solution driven, they are team players, they want a safe organisation and a safe environment for people. And that is, I think, is something that we can really, really build on. And I hope I'm not guilty of this, kind of going, well, we're back to normal, I don't have time to do that now. Because I think some of the relationships and the connections I've made on a personal level have been really supportive. And I think on a professional level, you know, there might be some massive approach to a COVID risk assessment. And I might think, well, I've got all of that. Gosh, that's a bit I haven't got, and it's brilliant. And I really hope that we can stay connected in the future. That would be something that I think would be really wonderful out of all this. And wouldn't it be lovely not to be connected in a crisis, but in just a best practice sharing, learning environment? And I'm optimistic. I think that, you know, that can really happen. But that would be my big kind of how we move forward.
Fabulous, thank you. And going to move to you, Philomene. I'm sure again you've got lots of thoughts and had lots of things shared with you about how perhaps the future might look post-COVID.
Absolutely, yeah. I really echo what Sam's saying. I think absolutely, you know, we can't unlearn what we've learned. And I'm mindful of the Einstein quote, you know, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking we use to create them. And I think we're in a situation where over the last 12 months, we've had to really think differently, and we can't change that. That's happened. And I see that there, you know, with the adoption of technology, the reaching out to people in different sectors and industries, widening our reach has meant we can learn so much more. And that will stimulate our creativity and our creative thinking. You know, being in a situation where we don't always have the answers, and you know, we've all been in that place where we don't necessarily know what comes next, but we have to kind of dig inward and actually reach out to others that maybe can provide a perspective. I'm hoping that doesn't change. And I kind of have witnessed, again, that within the creative industries, it's built on collaboration. You know, there is this kind of real sense of curiosity in enabling things to happen. And sometimes without an agenda. You know, it is about creating for the sake of seeing what happens. And I'm hopeful that, you know, within this kind of crazy time, that we can keep hold of some of that curiosity and kind of observe the world around us as if we were children, because children have great imagination. They're not kind of fettered by what they can't do. Bedtime maybe, and, you know, meal times perhaps and are an exception, but actually in terms of kind of being able to stretch a creative imagination, that kind of can abound. And I think, you know, as we grow older, we can lose that. And in times of crisis, we go through that kind of phase of panic, and then, you know, we will come out of this, but we will come out stronger and better with more resources, with the ability to use the technology that we have to really harness the creativity that's really rising up. And you know what I've witnessed is we've seen the best and worst of humanity in these situations, and when we see the very best, we see that collaboration, we see that reaching out, we see that learning, we see that pulling together. And, you know, from that, I think there will be, you know, I'm really excited to see how we evolve out of this situation and actually bring all of this learning with us. And I see a more blended way of being. So technology has obviously featured very, very highly in the way that we've been able to continue. And I kind of remember the days. One of my first jobs was working at the British Library in London, and I remember working on one of the very first computers with a CD-ROM. So that will date me. And I also remember the very early mobile phones, which were like, I never had one, but I had a very, very early Ericsson, which no longer exists. But also, I was always fascinated with technology, even at that sort of early point in my life. I think if I'd been born into as a Generation X or Generation Z, I would have been all over it. But I'm a as you can tell by the color of my hair, a little bit older, but I love technology, and I think it absolutely has a place. So, and it's a big part of how we move forward. So, let's see what other things are evolving, and in terms of, I think we are all kind of still to some extent in crisis mode. And once that sense of crisis, and in terms of what Zoe's saying, wouldn't it be great to see what happens when we're not in that situation, to see what happens, to be able to kind of function, because it's something that we can do, and we've kind of discovered those skills, and that ability, the things that perhaps we would never have known that we could do. We are suddenly being, it's like being, a child learning to ride a bike, and the stabilizers are taking off, and before you know it, you're kind of moving off. And we're kind of in that state where we're still those, reliant to some extent on those stabilizers, but really kind of there's potential to kind of to move off and to run free. So hopefully, and I kind of have great hope that we will continue with some of the learning. It started a bit of a kind of chain reaction, and creativity is something that actually we see a bit of a renaissance in terms of being able to delve into lots of different areas, tap into people's kind of resources and knowledge, enable that to kind of trigger our own curiosity and actually kind of be curious about the world, and to kind of look at what we can do with it. I mean, I've over the last 3 years I've seen a real rise in creatives are really kind of looking at how they can be an agent of change in a world that is kind of demanding change, and actually using creativity and creative thinking and creative ideas that kind of support people, planet and profit. So it's just really interesting to see that there's that level of awareness that we kind of need to hold all of those thoughts in place to be able to kind of create something that will enable us to kind of move on and evolve.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think coming to you, Zoe, and sort of same question, and already you sort of alluded to some of the innovation that I expect will carry on in the broadcast media as well. But I'm just going to put another sort of slight angle on the question to you, which is around health and safety professionals as well, and how we've had to change, of course, as professionals over the last few months. How much of that do you think will carry on and going into the future?
You know what, actually, I was saying, so at IMG, I worked with Faye Rockley, and we just kind of hit a point at a moment on one of our weekly catch-ups where we were like, it's exhausting. This is tougher because it's new. So, when you get a subject, so when I was at Endeavour, there'd be something new, for example, Winter Wonderland. And before that came into the business, I didn't have to know about fairground safety and ADIPS, etc. But there's loads of books on it. There's loads of advice, there's loads of guidance, there's all pre-established stuff and experts within my network that I can lean on. So Faye and I realized that actually what's draining us as safety advisors was that this is new. There isn't a document on somebody else's website that we can crib over and support our business with. We probably don't have somebody in our network who's an expert at managing pandemics and communicable diseases. I mean, that really is a tiny section. I'm not even sure it's in the IOSH diploma, but we've had to kind of go and take on a GCSE in this and learn it, work it out, and then work out how we support the business. And it's hundreds of questions. So that's the kind of bit that's been kind of exhausting, going, gosh, we really are having to work it out and work out how we support our businesses and the risk owners with brand new knowledge that we're having to have the confidence in ourselves as well. So that's the other piece of it. A lot of the time when somebody needs advice on something, we have confidence in what we're giving because it's peer reviewed. It's come from one of our experts in our network that really knows this particular, element of safety. But COVID, communicable disease and pandemics, when we issue guidance and advice, it's been a really good opportunity to make sure and sense check within ourselves, is the advice we're giving my opinion based on my risk perception, or is it from the chief medical officer? Is it based on peer review? Or did I just read it in a news article? Or have I seen it published on a reputable website? And it's just made us as safety advisors just pause for a second and go, am I giving my opinion based on I think it's safe to go outside? No, I don't. Or am I giving the business and the risk owners information? And I think that means then we can go back to other things as well and look, am I giving advice on, I don't know, fire safety because my personal view is this based on my risk perception? Or am I, giving advice based on reputable peer-reviewed information? So I think that's been a real sort of eye-opener in the last few months for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I've been sort of prompted as well by a question that Roy asked, which is around just the changing nature of the guidance and advice. And I think, one of the things that's really hit me is over the last few months is that, again, we tend to be confident in our advice, and that advice tends to stay generally static. Now with COVID-19, I mean, it's just been all over the place, right? Wear face masks, don't wear face masks, clean 5 times a day, don't, and retaining our level of credibility and trust when we are the guidance is changing, and we've got to be okay with that, right? And I think that's one of the things that's very, very much reflected on me, that just because something has changed, and it might be the opposite of what we were advising 3 months ago, but that's okay because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. I'm going to we've got so many questions, guys, we're not going to get to the end of them, but thank you for keeping them coming in. I'm going to ask each of you now one specific question that's come in, and it's from Francis. And what Francis has asked is, what's the best thing that COVID has caused you personally to change? So I'm going to ask you first, Sam. What have you particularly changed yourself?
I have, due to the fact of not commuting from Southeast London to North London, I've been in a position to walk a lot more. So I love going to the gym, which of course has been closed the majority of the time. I love going to the gym and I love keeping fit. It's been fantastic to do that for years. But actually, when the gyms have been closed, I have been forced to look at how I'm going to do different things. And so being given the opportunity to walk around Blackheath at 11:30 at night and not see anybody, any cars, but hundreds of foxes, has honestly been, I think it's enabled me to, exercise more in an outside environment and see the world, I think, a little bit differently. And I've always liked nature, etc., but just to really appreciate, I started walking in early April, literally half 11 at night to avoid people. And Blackheath and Greenwich's final approach into Heathrow, there was not a single plane, not a single car, not a single person. And it was actually scary and worrying, but really refreshing. And I have continued to do that and really just appreciate, if I'm honest, being outside in a different environment. That's been the biggest personal change I've had.
Thanks, Sam. Philomena, what's the biggest change for you?
Wow, biggest change. I mean, working from home has been absolutely the missing piece, I think, in the way that I work. I'm very much a homebody. I do like not having to commute. I like not having to travel. It's given me more time to really kind of delve into my own kind of personal creativity and well-being. So I practice meditation and qigong. I've been doing much more journaling and writing. I've been doing a lot more walking and having a deeper appreciation for nature. So I echo what Sam's been saying about her experience. It's enabled me to slow down and not feel any kind of obligation to do anything that I don't necessarily want to do. So it's really helped to filter out the things that actually were just distractions. And as a consequence of those distractions, my energy's been taken in other directions, and perhaps, feeling more tired, feeling a little bit more, a little bit more stressed out. Ironically, my health is improved dramatically. I'm not necessarily an unwell person, but feeling less stressed and having a much more regulated morning and evening practice, spending more time in nature, connecting with people that kind of nourish me, rather than those where I feel an obligation to connect with because you have to. So I think from my personal experience, I think this way of being really has suited me, and actually being disconnected to an extent, and not completely, because I love what I do, and I love kind of connecting in with my clients, and really kind of learning and researching. I'm a lifelong learner. It's really given me the space to do that, and to really start looking at ways of articulating that. So it's been really beneficial to me, and in turn I hope it is a benefit to my clients, because if I'm in at that place of wellness and centeredness and focused attention, and can hold space for people, then that's good for them. So if it's good for me, it's good for others.
Great, thanks. And Zoe, best change for you? Lots of change for you, I guess.
I know. I'm trying to think of a way to say this without smashing my own reputation, but I would say it's becoming more selfish. It's given me the opportunity to really work out how I like to work and how I get the best out of myself. So it is stressful at the moment. It's stressful for everybody, but being a safety practitioner, like I said, we're dealing with a topic that is forever changing. Sometimes we're having to go back on advice and say, actually, change. And we think that, gets to our integrity, which is pivotal to the strength of our advice as well. So for me, it's been a good opportunity to work out how I like to work, so that I have that guilt-free brain space, so that I'm not kind of clouded with stress. Stress creates cortisol, that clouds the prefrontal lobe, and that's where you do your quick thinking. Like, when you're in an interview and you have to think quick and you have to think through things. I don't want stress and cortisol there when somebody rings me and goes, I've got a stressy situation. For me, the answer is not in a book or in any of the exams I've done. I've really got to think smart and think quickly to support them. So it's working out how I create guilt-free brain space, whether it's a walk at lunchtime, not today because it's raining, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to have a chocolate bar and watch the Kardashians, and that's how I like to kind of chill out. But it's being selfish, working out what I like to do that means I can manage, so I can best support the business and be at the sharpest point when they phone me with whatever question they're going to throw at me.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Zoe. And we're going to draw it to a close now. I know we've had so many questions through, so again, I always have to apologise we haven't been able to answer them all. But I hope that, having looked at some of the questions as well, that the great insight that our panelists have given has helped to give you all some sort of insight into what creativity is meant to our expert panel during the crisis. And it's great that we've had almost 400 people attending this webinar, so I'm sure all of you will have found things to take away. So I do have to thank our panel very much indeed. It's been great hearing from you. So once again, on behalf of everyone and from IOSH, thanks ever so much for your contribution. Just as I look to close the webinar, let me remind everyone again that the IOSH does have its own COVID-19 resources page, where we've got advice and guidance that we're constantly updating to reflect the situation as it develops, which is fast and often, as we've just mentioned. And there's links to the recording of this webinar and all of the other webinars we've had in the past. And you'll get a post-webinar email where all of those links will be. So what's next? In 4 weeks' time, our next webinar will be on the law in lockdown, workplace rights and obligations. So I expect most of us will probably still be in lockdown in 4 weeks' time. So do sign up and come along, because we'll be partnering again with the Law Society, and we'll have a panel of legal experts to examine how COVID continues to affect law and regulations related to both employment and worker protection. And you'll find the details of this coming up on the IOSH website and all of the IOSH communications. So please look out for that. And finally, just before I go, I do want to mention our Future Leaders Conference, which is going to take place in March this year. Of course, it will be a virtual conference, and we'll make use of the event technology that we've got. And this will allow delegates to make use of video network opportunities. We'll have some interactive workshops, and the conference will offer the opportunity to hear the latest insights around career progression, human factors, culture change, and a huge amount else. So we haven't yet opened the bookings for the conference, but please save the date. You can see it there, and register your interest to attend on the IOSH events page. And I think Ben's just added the link to the chat box now. So all it remains for me to once again thank our panelists for their involvement, for the great responses and insight they've given us, and thank you all for participating. So thanks again, continue to stay safe, look after each other, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. So thank you and goodbye.